pile system. These are non-aerated pile systems, non-aerated pile systems, sorry. And so it's pretty simple. Again, you want your pile to be at least 3 feet by 3 feet. They can be as high as like 8 feet by 8 feet. You don't really want it any higher than that. Very simple systems. You can do these with manual labor, or you can have a bobcat or any size tractor with the bucket and make your piles. And the best thing, or the only thing you really have to factor in here, is you just want to mix them up and make sure your mixings are homogeneous, so you get your temperatures up there. And then you will either your frequency of decomposition, or how fast the microbes decompose everything, is how often you turn the piles, whether that's by hand or with your machines. And you can see the steam coming off there, and that's a hot pile, and that's what your pile will be doing. So this is a passively aerated compost pile. So remember the PVC pipes we saw sticking out of the bin? These are for piles or windrows, and windrows are just elongated piles, and we'll show you a picture of those in a minute. So the goal is you take a perforated PVC, you take a PVC pipe, and they're like 4 to 6 inches in diameter. You can make them as wide a diameter as 10 inches, depending on what you have accessible or is cheap. And then you put holes in them, you drill holes in them about there's like a couple millimeters of hole size. And then they'll go along about every 12 inches or so, the length of the pipe. And then some of the pipe sticks out. You build your pile on top of that, and then you let it sit, and the air goes through the pipes, and then it's a chimney effect, and it comes out of the top, and it just does this circular thing. And again, you want a homogeneous mix so that everything's mixed up in there, and the decomposers have lots of good yummies to eat. And then you just let the pile sit, and then you can let it sit, and in about 2 weeks, and then you turn it. And that's about it. All right, so again, passive on the left. This is a forced air system on the right, similar to the sunrise operation. As you see, the forced air systems can be very simple, though. So this is something that, and I've got some resources on that you can actually set up on your own. It takes like a motor, like from a leaf blower kind of motor. It's exactly the same thing. And then they go up into scale on equipment even higher than that. So with these passive systems, whether it's forced air or just a passive system, you do put a cover, a cap, what's it called, a cap over your materials. So you get your homogeneous mix, you layer it on the passive, on the PVC piping, and then you cover that with either some wood shavings or finished compost. You can use wood chips if you're going to screen, but best not if you're not going to screen. And that just caps everything, and it keeps the pile insulated so that the moisture remains inside the pile, and it also helps it heat up faster because the heat's not escaping. So again, this is an aerated pile, and this is and/or windrow. You can do these on elongated piles or windrow systems. And you see the one on the right is just a real simple leaf blower kind of model. And then the one on the left, it's a similar kind of operation. And that's actually on a farm. All right, so turn windrows is where you actually aerate the system. So it's similar to a pile system. And with the turn windrows, what the notion is that you build your basic structure, you make it really homogeneous, you don't have any passive pipes underneath, and then you just add to it. So you add to it on one end. You want to monitor each end of the piles, and just remember where you keep adding your materials. So like if you're going to add your materials on the one that's on the left there, right at the front, and then you roll the materials down as you turn so that the end is more finished, and the first one is where you add all your materials. You'll have, with any kind of pile system or with windrows, your compost will be completed in about 6 months or up to a year, depending on your frequency of turning. And with windrows in particular, You want to keep your piles and your temperature monitored. And then when the temperatures reach about 140 degrees, you can go ahead and turn it. And as it declines in temperature, that's also when you want to make sure you return it. If it goes below 120 degrees, it's time to turn it. So when you first build your windrows, you're going to turn it usually about once a week or so, or maybe even twice a week, to keep those temperatures going up to over 120. But then as it cools down and it's less out of the active phase, you can turn it less frequent, and then it'll just keep composting and decomposing. There are, I put together a spreadsheet on all of these, and that'll give you the ideal parameters and all the diagram for the windrows. The benefit on the windrows is that you kind of make it less curvy, less mountainous, and more flat on top. And that's a better way to get the water in and less flowing out. So the one on the left is on a farm, and instead of covering your compost with a cap, like with compost, or finished compost or wood shavings, you can actually use a cloth cover, and you can purchase those, or you can get them online and such. And then this is an example of a community composting where they're turning their windrow by hand. So that's also potentially, you don't have to have a tractor to do these kinds of things.
So this is Stratford Village Farm in Stratford, Vermont, where they had been taking food scraps from the school and the general store in town and bringing them to their farm and mixing them with mostly barn bedding. And we held a class there showing folks how to turn the pile. We did have a bucket loader. We also had people by hand. So in this particular case, we had both people and tractor working together to flip the pile and to layer in bedding materials, which, as I mentioned earlier, is often the problem when you get to a pile and it's really stinky. There wasn't enough feedstock in there to begin with, so we relayered the pile with enough feedstock. And so this is just an example of a hand-turned or mildly tractor-turned windrow pile that Athena was just going over. And here we are at Tamerlane Farm. Tamerlane is Kingdom View Compost. They're up in Lyndonville. Eric Paris has been running this operation for a while, and he's been working closely with Brian Jaros. If any of you are interested in fancy systems, sometimes very simple fancy systems, I would get in touch with Brian Jaros, and we can certainly put you in touch with him as well. Check out AgriLab Technologies, who's been doing a lot of work on composting and compost heat recovery and advancing aerated static systems in Vermont. So this particular system is a medium scale facility on their way to a large scale facility. They realized that with the advent of the aerated static system with the forced air, they were able to increase the speed with which they were processing materials, so they increased their capacity for what they can take in and what they'll be putting out. And this has become quite a good operation for Eric Paris up at Tamerlane Farms. So an example of how big you can go. There are bigger than this too.
But this is definitely big in the Vermont farm composting scale, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yep, forced air systems are really the best for composting food scraps, particularly on a larger scale. So, hey, Natasha, can you point over the box in the back there? So that's where the motor is, and you see the pipe coming out there. And so that's all connected to all of these pipes that are going in each of these bays so that they can have piles on each bay or rotate that pile into the other bay. And so And you notice there's not really high, it's just wider, and then there's pipes underneath all of those. So, and they've got a system where they can actually pull out their pipes, because you can see where they pull them out instead of it having to turn the materials. So for smaller systems, the thing you got to be careful is when you turn the materials, you have to be careful not to break the pipes because they can be damaged. But it's a great system because it gets your compost and food scraps going really hot, really fast.
But
Okay.
definitely not necessary, for sure. So
No, but
we do have a question for Kat. When you mention medium or large scale systems, are you using the solid waste management rule definitions as the thresholds? And just the quick answer to that is yes.
Yes.
Those are so these are farms in Vermont that have decided to go the certification route with the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, Department of Environmental Conservation, solid waste management rules. And we have Bonnie who raised their hand. Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, these systems can be very, very simple, as in the uncovered, unaerated windrows, or they can be a lot more complicated with all kinds of aeration systems. Why would you not want to just go simple, with the turned windrows? Is it that you can produce more faster with aeration? So that would be the incentive to get more complex with it?
So it depends. It goes back to some of what we talked about, or Kat, I think, was talking about at the beginning in terms of the goals of the individual farms. And that's one of the things that we've been talking with each of our partner farms about. So for Tamerlane, for example, because we're on this slide, they're taking a lot of food scraps from a broad community. And so it's also important to say that they didn't start this size, right? So they started out small and they've grown. So they're a little bit more mature in terms of how long they've been doing on-farm composting and processing food scraps along with on-farm organic residuals. So they are looking to produce, like if your goal as a farm was to produce as much finished compost as quickly as possible, some of these aerated systems will get you there faster, and it will allow you to process more material through your system, as Kat was just explaining. If you have just a small 3-bin system, or a 4-bin system, you're turning, you're putting less in, it's taking a little bit longer, and you're still getting finished compost, but it's at a different scale and a different tempo, I guess I would say. And we're definitely encouraging, we sort of wanted to show the whole variety or the whole full spectrum of different types of systems and sizes. But, all of these farms have started small and are growing up now, some of the larger ones that we've seen. And they have different goals in mind in terms of the volume, how they're defining their community, what size their CSAs are, what the different sources of their feedstocks are coming from. And so those are just some of the things that you would keep in mind that would guide the decision around what kind of system and what size system.
Yeah, and our role is to really work with each farm, partner with what their goals are and what their tools and equipment are and their space and what their, feedstock
and their compost confidence.
And to start small. And there are no right systems or wrong systems. There's the best management practices within each system to make it work. And so there's, absolutely no no judgment on any system, but just to show everybody the overview so that if you want to start with this system, you could, grow it into another system just so you can plan, or keep that system and then just grow that other system. So
I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
Which actually isn't related to my previous question, but it came up for me earlier and I didn't want to lose it. One of our motivations in diverting food waste from landfills is to reduce the production of methane, greenhouse gas. the problem. So can you talk a little bit about, in an earlier slide that Kat showed, there was the inputs and the outputs are like water, heat, and CO2. So what, is there a different, if one of your goals is to keep your emissions, whether they be carbon or methane, as low as possible, if you're doing more aggressive aeration and so forth, does that change the output of emissions or no?
There's always some carbon dioxide that comes off of a compost pile, but much less than the methane. Methane is a much more powerful greenhouse gas. And when you put food scraps into a landfill or any organic matter into a landfill, off goes methane. So through composting, you have all the benefits of generating a soil amendment and reusing those food scraps and organic materials to make that soil amendment. Plus, you're not transporting all the food scraps and organic materials to a landfill, which is for us in northern Vermont. And you're keeping those resources locally. So you're greatly reducing any kind of carbon dioxide that's generated through transportation. And very minimal amounts of carbon dioxide are come off your compost windrows or piles.
Kat, did you want to?
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. It comes back to the bugs, those little microbes that I get so excited about. The ones that like air are the ones that we are inviting and creating buffets for, and those are aerobic organisms. And when we're doing composting, which by nature is aerobic, we are not fostering the anaerobic organisms, the ones that don't prefer a lot of air. And those are the ones that create the stinky gases like sulfur and ammonia, but also the non-stinky but very powerful gas of methane.
Methane. And so that's ones we want to avoid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did that help, Bonnie?
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry. Yes. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and there are calculators that we'll be using with to measure the amount of food scraps, and that also calculates the gas, greenhouse gas reductions through our composting efforts. So we'll be working with the farms to factor those out.